Everyone, and welcome to this Java tutorial. This tutorial is going to cover all the fundamental programming concepts that you're going to need in order to code in Java. And I won't be covering everything because that's going to be like a 5-hour video. So I cut it down to variables, arithmetic operations, conditions, loops, arrays, user inputs, and a few practice problems. So let's get started right away. So Java has this thing where you can write comment, and in order to write a comment, you do 2 slashes, and you write your comment. And this isn't seen by Java; it's basically there to help users and other developers know what you're doing. So, variables. So in Java, there are stuff called variables, and this holds some sort of value. This is the same thing as math concepts. Let's say, for example, we want to define 2 variables, x and y, where we can add them up, divide them, and subtract them. And let's say we want a variable that holds a character of a bunch of characters, so like words and messages. So these are known as data types. You have to specify the data type when declaring the variables. So there are integers, there are strings, and booleans, and floats, and a whole bunch of stuff. So we're going to cover integers and strings and booleans once we're talking about conditions. So in order to declare a variable, we want to declare, we want to write down what data type. So in this case, we want to declare a variable x, which is an integer, and we're going to write x is equal to, let's say, 10. And whenever you finish a line in Java, you have to use the semicolon. Now, let's write int y is equal to 12. So if we want to print to the console, which is right here, if we want to print out what x plus y is, we simply write system.out.println, the semicolon. And this just basically means print out whatever's inside this bracket. And we print out x plus y. And this should print out 22. And yes, it does. So you have several different math operators. So this is moving on to arithmetic operations. So you can also have let's say x minus y, and x times y. Let's see, x divided by y, and there is another operator called the modulus, which returns the remainder of 2 numbers. So if we want to find the remainder of 12 divided by 10, which is of course 2, because 10 goes into 12 once, and you have 2 left over. So this mod operator, modulus returns a remainder. Use the percent sign. So we're going to use y mod x, and that will give us 2. So if we go ahead and print this out, we see that x plus y is 22, x minus y is negative 2, x times y is 120, x divided by y is 0, because it rounds down, and so it gets rid of the decimal places, and so 10 divided by 12 is 0. And then y mod x is 2, which is the remainder. And now you have to keep in mind that operations follow bedmass, so if we wrote something like x times, actually let's not use the variables, let's use numbers. 4 times 2 plus 3. This isn't going to print out 20, it's going to print out 11. Yeah, that should be right. 4 times 2, and then whatever this is, so 8 plus 3 is 11. It's not going to do 2 plus 5 and then 2 plus 3 and then 4. It's going to print out 20. So let's go ahead and print this out and see what happens. So we get 11. So it's just like algebra. Multiplication comes first, and then you do addition. So keep that in mind. And if we want, we can put this in brackets, and then we will get 20 right there. So let's go ahead and comment all this out and move on to conditional statements. So basically, when you're doing conditional statements, it's statements that are executed depending on some certain condition. So let's say, for example, we have a Boolean called Boolean raining, which is equal to true. So we're going to have an if statement, and this is how you write if statements. First you have the word if, and then two regular brackets, and then outside there are curly brackets. And this is where you will write the condition. So if the condition which is inside the bracket is true, or if it holds true, then you execute whatever's between the braces. So let's say that we want to check if it's raining. So we check the weather, and if it's raining, then we pack an umbrella. If it's not, we don't. So we're going to write that. So if raining is equal to true, we use equal to compare the operators. If it's true, then we just write out pack an umbrella. And now we have an else if statement. So this just directly translates to if not the first condition, then the second condition. So if raining is equal to false, and we spell that right first of all, then we write don't pack an umbrella. And if you're already familiar with programming languages, you'll know that this isn't good code, because we could have just simply wrote else and all this. So let's utilize the else statement, and let's first run this and see what happens. So it says pack an umbrella because raining is equal to true. So if we chose to set that equal to false, then it says don't pack an umbrella. So instead of writing all this, well, instead of writing this, we could have just simply wrote else. And this just means everything else besides the first condition, if that's true, then you don't pack an umbrella. Of course, Booleans have true or false, and so there's only two inputs that you can really have. So an if and an else statement is the way to go for here. Now, let's move on to loops. So loops just basically execute a specific block of code several times. So we have two different loops. We have for loops, and then we have while loops. Enhanced for loop is the same thing, it's just a slightly bit different. And we're going to use enhanced for loops in the array section, and you'll see exactly why in a bit. So when you're writing a for loop, it has three parts to it. So you have a for, and right here, you're going to initialize some variable. Typically, we write int I is equal to 0, and then you have some condition in the second part of the for loop. So here, we're going to write as long as I is less than 5, keep on executing this. And now we need to do something with I in order for it to actually stop working, or else it's just going to keep on going forever and ever. So we're going to set I we're going to increment I every single time. So plus plus literally just means add 1 to it each time. So basically what happens is we're going to write hello world right here. And let's see how many times it gets printed out. I want this to come up, so let's go ahead and write that. We can see that hello world gets printed 5 times. So what exactly is happening? So first of all, int I is equal to 0. That's the initialization. So it sees that, okay, I is currently equal to 0, and 0 is less than 5, so this is true, so we're going to go through and print this out. And then we're going to increment I by 1. So it goes back to the top. I is now 1 because 0 plus 1 is 1. And 1 is less than 5, and it sees that this is true, and so it prints it out again. It keeps on doing that until it reaches 4. So once it gets to 4, it sees that, okay, it's true, and then it prints it out, because 4 is less than 5, and then it increments once, and then it goes to the very top, and it sees that 5 is less than 5. No, that's not true. 5 is equal to 5. So it does not print it out, and we stop at the 5th iteration. If we wrote int I is equal to 1, then it would print out 4 times. So why do we choose 0? Well, we're going to explain that in the arrays section, because indices, I'm not sure what the plural is, but index always starts at 0. And you'll see what I mean in just a little bit. So now we have a while loop. So this is pretty much the same thing. While some condition is true, you're going to execute this block of code. So let's say we have some number int count is equal to, let's say, 5. So while count is greater than or equal to 0, it's gonna write hi there, and that's that. So you're looking at this, and if you run this right now, it's just gonna keep on going forever. Why? Because we never do anything with count to ever make this untrue. This condition is always going to be true. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to decrement count by 1. So let's work this out, and we'll hit run in a bit. So count is currently equal to 5. So as long as 5 is greater than or equal to 0, which it is, it prints out this. And then it decreases count by 1, which is 4. 4 is greater than or equal to 0, which is true, does this. Prints out hi there. It keeps on doing that until it reaches 0, and then it decreases and then becomes -1. -1 is no longer greater than or equal to 0, so it prints it out. It doesn't print it out, sorry. So as you can see, it prints it out 6 times. That's pretty much it. You have a for loop and a while loop. Now, let's move on to arrays. So arrays are basically, let me comment this out. Arrays are basically lists of numbers or characters known as items. And you have to realize that there's a difference between the index value and the value itself. So an array can have, let's say, the items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's keep it nice and simple. So if we're talking about the index, we're talking about the place where the items are located. So the very first index, it does not start at 1. It starts at 0. This can be a very confusing concept, and this is a huge mistake most beginner programmers make, and they just assume that this is the first number, second, third, fourth, fifth, because that's just logical, but that's not how it is. So here, this is the 0th index. We call this the 0th index, so that's the very first item. And then this is the first value, or the index at 1, the index at 2, the index at 3, and 4. So the index values are just n minus 1, where n is the amount of items you have, and yeah, just n minus 1. So there are 5 items, so the total value here is 4. The index value goes up to 4. So let's not use this. We're going to, well, we could use that actually. So we'll use these same values. Let's just copy this so it makes our life a bit easier. So let's declare an array. In order to declare an array, you have to use int. You write the name of your array. For our purpose, we're going to write ARR, and then you follow it by square brackets. And then we're going to define the values. So here we have the values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we use int because this is all numbers. If we had, say, for example, Bob, this will no longer work. Why? Because there's a string, and you declare this as an int. that's illegal. You can't do that. Java's like, what the hell's going on? So in this case, if you have like a million items in your array and one of them has a letter in it or is a string, then guess what? You're going to have to use string, and you're going to have to put quotations around every single number. So always remember to do that. So what's the purpose of an array? So there's a lot of stuff that you can do with arrays. You can go through the arrays using a loop and add up all the values, which is actually one of our practice problems. And you can sort the array. You can put them in descending and ascending order. You can find the smallest value in the array. You can find the largest number, and so on and so forth. Finding the smallest number and finding the largest number is a very, very famous problem, which I won't be covering in this video. But once you start understanding Java a bit more, you can easily go ahead and tackle that problem. And so we have the array right here, and like I mentioned before, you can have string values. So let's say we have a string that has names. So we just explicitly write everything else. So let's say my name is Ian. Let's say Bob, Kyle, and let's say Jack. So what if we wanted to print out every single item in the array? So what do we do? So let's say we want to print out every single item in this array. Without using an enhanced for loop, which some of you might actually know, let's print out the values. So of course we're going to have int I is equal to 0, I is less than array.length. So this is a special function that you can use from the array with arrays, and you can get the length of the array. So let's go ahead and the values. And so in order to print this out, why did it start over there? System.out.println. So in order to print out the values, so every single specific value, you're going to have to get the value at each index. So you're not just going to simply write I, that's just going to print out 0 up until 4. Don't believe me? It's just going to print out 0 up until 4. Because 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I is not the value itself, it's the index. So in order to get the actual values, we're going to have to write array of I. So this just says whatever I is, just return that value. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's make this 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So just going to print out 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So I really hope that made sense. And we can implement an enhanced for loop. So an enhanced for loop just is a for loop that does not have this stuff. It's slightly different. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So of course you're going to have the brackets and then the curly braces, and we're going to utilize this and print out every single one without having to write all this code out, because this is long and tedious. So what an enhanced for loop says is for every, so you have to specify the data type. So for every, let's say value in, which is just colon, the array names, we're going to simply we're just going to simply print out the value. And see, this is far less, well, not far less, but it's less code than this. We no longer have to initialize some variable, we don't have to have a condition, and we don't need to change the variable every single time. So what this is going to do is it's going to print out all the names in our given array. So let's comment this out. So we have Sion, Bob, Kyle, and Jack. That's all there is to it. That's an enhanced for loop. let's go ahead and comment this out and move on to user input. So whenever you're using user input, there are a lot of stuff like hash tables, linked lists, scanners, array lists. In order to use those, you have to declare or you have to import from a Java library. I won't go into details about this, but basically it just gives you access to a scanner. And if you don't want to write this out for every single one that you utilize, you can simply just write start and you will gain access to everything. So like I said, array lists, hash tables, linked lists, all that stuff you have access to. There's a lot more, but those are just some that I just named off the top of my head. Since we're not using all those, we're just going to use a scanner, or we'll just put scanner. Alright, so this is how a scanner works. So we have to make a scanner object. We will talk about objects in object-oriented programming, which I cover in my entire course. This is just a quick run-through of the major components of Java in order to get you started. But if you want to learn more about object-oriented programming, I'll have a link to my website in the description. Anyway, in order to use an input, a scanner, you have to create a scanner object. So input is what I called it. I could have named this slime. Like you could name this literally anything. You can name it X, Y, computer, whatever. So just to make everything clear, this is our input, and of course it's the value the user types in. So we write scanner input is equal to new scanner and then brackets system.in, and that creates a scanner object, and we called it input. You could call it whatever you want. And then we have to give them, the user, some sort of a prompt. So what are we typing in? So it says enter username, this bottom. So what this is doing is it's checking for the value that we put into username or input. And we just set whatever we write at the very top equal to input. Username. Sorry, I'm confusing all the variables. It reads the user input and sets username is equal to input, and then it prints out your username is and whatever you wrote. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So Siam 5678 or 678. I missed the 5, and then we hit enter, and it says your username is Siam678. And we could use this just for numbers, and in order to do that, we're going to have to change this to next int. And this is basically throwing an error because we didn't specify the data type, the right data type. So we have to do int, and then it sees next input. But we're writing a username, so it's going to have characters and numbers, so we just write next line. Now, let's quickly go over what we learned. I know this was pretty fast, but it really does not take long to learn a programming language. So, we're going to have some sort of an array, and we're going to find the sum of all the items in an array. So let's see, int input, the brackets, remember, is equal to, we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and of course, this all adds to 55. So once we run this, we'll see if our code actually worked or not. So then we're going to loop through every single item in the list and add to some variable called int total. And we're going to just set that equal to 0 for the time being. Now, what do we do now? So we're going to have to initialize int I is equal to 0, I is less than input dot length, and I plus plus. So remember, I is less than input.length, which is the length of the entire array, and so we add each time so it loops through and goes to the next value. Now, we're going to take the total value is equal to total plus, so initially it's 0 is equal to 0 plus the first value, so the ith index. Remember, in order to access the individual items, you're going to have to write array name and bracket I. So let's go ahead and add those up. Input of I. And so this should print out 55. I forgot to print it out. I switch between a lot of programming languages, so I mix up the syntax and a whole bunch of stuff. So print total. So we're going to print out the total, and we see that total is equal to 55. But what is this number? We don't want to just spit out the number, so we're going to write all numbers in array added up is equal to plus total. Array added up is 55. Alright, perfect. So now let's utilize the scanner. We're going to have two numbers which the user is going to input, and then we add, subtract, multiply them. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to have, remember, scanner, we have to make some object of the scanner. A scanner object. Scanner, let's take input, because I really like that. Variable name doesn't make sense. And now we're going to have system. I just don't want to repeatedly write that over and over. In IntelliJ, all you had to do was S out and then hit enter. Please enter number 1. And so, since this is an integer, int num1 is equal to input dot next int. It's no longer in next line because this is not a string. And then we're going to have please enter number 2. And this is going to be equal to num2 is equal to input dot next int. So we're just going to take the values and do this. Addition of num1 plus num2. And then we're going to copy this down. And remember, it said subtract, so subtraction, we take and just subtract values. And then multiplication. I did not write division because I know some of you are going to try to divide by 0, and in order to catch that, you need to have a try-catch exception method. And I'll be covering that in my full course as well. My full course basically covers pretty much everything from variables all the way to data structures and algorithms. So everything you need for an interview. And that should be it. Let's go ahead and run this. So we have please enter number 1, 5. Please enter number 2, 6. So the numbers added together is 11. The numbers subtracted together is -1. And multiplying them together gives you 30. So that covered pretty much a huge chunk of Java programming. You have everything from variables to data types to arithmetic operations, conditional statements, loops like for loops, while loops, and enhanced for loops, and arrays, what their index values are, how to get the individual values, scanners and user inputs, making a scanner object, and we went over a few possible coding interview questions. And if you want to learn more, please visit my website, which will be in the description below, and that will cover pretty much everything in Java. And I also have a course on Python, so if that interests you, definitely go check that out. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the future.